The World Championship has concluded. Gukesh has won. We are going to review how we thought about the match, our predictions, all the stuff that went down. But first, we're going to make an important announcement. We have been working forever on a book called How to Analyze Your Games According to the Dojo. This features a couple words by us, but more importantly, the annotations of more than 100 dojoers doing really great work. And one of the whole ambitions of the dojo was, could we get people from all levels of play to analyze their games? And this book is a testament to that. They did it, and it's just remarkable. And we wanted to put it out there so other people could see and learn from it.
Yeah, and be inspired.
Yeah.
Yeah, very exciting. So check out the book. It's on Amazon. We'll put links in descriptions and stuff. But yeah, that's huge. But let's talk about this match. We streamed a lot of it. David woke up at 1 a.m. Pacific time every night to host it.
We streamed almost all of it, Kostya. We missed 1 minute of the entire match.
There was an important moment we missed.
Oh yeah? Which moment?
Towards the end, where Jesse had to go pick up his kids from school. I got disconnected. It was towards the end of the match.
I stayed on, Kostya.
Oh, you were on. Yeah. No, you were on.
We streamed the whole thing. Just before I could sign off, one of our viewers said, "Why don't you just spar this endgame with me a couple times, David?"
Yeah.
I was collapsing. I was dead by the last game, just like Jesse wants it to be. The end of the match, somebody like needs to be held up in their chair. And that was me. I was dead. And Jesse and Kostya wandered off, and Andy wandered off, and everybody said, yeah, it's just like a dead draw. Ding's drawing technique. It's perfection, like he just knew, just go to the 3 versus 2 on one side of the board. Don't worry about the queen side. Don't worry about anything except rapid tie breaks tomorrow. And I was, a little bit depressed by that fact as well, right? Because I hate the rapid tie breaks, so that's pushing down my mood. Mm-hmm. And I was ready to go. And then somebody's like, just spar it with me a little bit, David. And as you guys know, I'm a yes man. So if somebody begs for something, I'm like, okay, sure, fine. So I'm sitting there sparring the end game with the dojoer, who had been actively watching every round, and chatting and giving ideas throughout, which was like a great part of our coverage as well. Is like we're all sort of chatting together, not just the 3 of us, but the whole viewership. And so we're playing it out, and suddenly like I look over at the live board in the corner, and I'm like, what is Ding doing? Because he put his bishop in the corner instead of on any other square on the long diagonal, which is weird. And then immediately after, he brings the rook to f4. And I was just re-explaining to somebody like, well, the rook is best on the A file because of checking distance. Like even with little time, like you can't lose because it's just sort of basic where you place your pieces, right? Bishop on the long diagonal, rook on the A file, harass the king from a safe distance. He plays rook f4. I'm like, oh, that's weird. And somebody had just asked, like, what are the chances that Ding could lose this endgame? And I said, less than 1%. So anyway, thanks to Asher, I was still streaming and we did not miss the end. Right. In fact, you'll see I took a lot of flack in the comments for how badly I commented on that moment, but at least
I would love to talk
we were
about
on.
That.
Yeah, I can tell you about that later in our show today.
Yeah, wow. So, okay, I guess we should talk first about our predictions going into the match.
Yeah.
I remember thinking that Gukesh was going to crush it, but I was, nervous about it, hesitant, because, as we explained in our preview to the World Championship, Ding is a former number 2 player, former 2800 player. He wasn't actually like the number 23 player in the world. Was never that easy.
Yeah.
But it ended up being a lot closer than most of us thought it would be, right?
And I think just in black and white, we all predicted that Gukesh would win by 3 games, and the match would be sort of done around game 12. Mm-hmm. I think that's sort of like the black and white prediction. But then, as you say, like you could soften how wrong we were by saying we did all say that Ding was a bit of an asterisk or question mark, right? Because the way he'd been playing that year, he would get crushed. But you never know it's unprecedented. Somebody who's had that drop in such a short period of time. A year and a half ago in the match with Nepo, he was at a much higher level, so it's hard to know what's going to show up. And that was always an open question, I think.
Right. And I think we nailed it too with some of the dynamics of the match where I said there's going to be weird opening moves from Gukesh from both black and white, right? And they weren't necessarily like the best moves or anything. They're just a weird move. And I said that he would tank incredibly like he's done in the past. And that also happened, right?
Yeah.
And then I think the thing that I didn't foresee was just how bad Ding would be tanking. Right.
Right. Which almost overshadowed the fact that Gukesh was tanking. Like when you when you say here in this podcast, like I told you Gukesh would tank and look how he tanked.
Yeah.
Some people are probably thinking like, Gukesh, are you getting like Ding Gukesh? Are you saying the name?
Right.
Because Ding was tanking before Gukesh in the games. But the fact that Ding would spend an hour on the first 9 or 10 moves and then Gukesh was quickly catching up with him sometime in the next 15 moves shows that Gukesh was indeed also using up incredible amounts of time.
Yeah. It was funny that happened like literally every game. Like Ding was out prepared in the opening, would lose an hour, and then at some point Gukesh would fumble out of his book and then spend an hour getting some kind of unclear situation. And then they would play from there.
He had the biggest think, at least in modern history. I was trying to go back and find, other matches, but it's hard when you go pre-modern history, even recent matches, it's hard to see how long people took. But he spent on that move, Bishop G2, the game he ended up winning, though we felt he was basically lost. He spent an hour. He spent an hour on a move, dude. An hour. Yeah. It was stunning. Yeah. I feel like we got the dynamic right, except for Ding tanking. I didn't see that coming.
I think you did more than me, Jesse, because I predicted that Gukesh would sort of be switch hitting with white, right? Like zipping around, looking for little tricks, like try something here, try something there, surprise here, surprise there. But I had I did not realize he would play, let's say, so aggressively with black as well, which you clearly stated in our previous show, that he would try to win the games with black, that he would try to at least turn them into big fights and use up energy and time and effort and whatever resources he could in those games. And I was sort of thinking like people are happy to get equality with black. If you play like clean, solid top moves nowadays, with the supercomputer's help, people are finding more and more that the advantage for white is smaller than we thought it was. Even just 10 to 15 years ago, we thought white's advantage was like 0.3, 0.35, 0.4, depends on the person, right? And you remember there was this book, Black is Okay, and it was kind of like iconoclastic, right? It was like, well, that guy's just, just a funny guy with his own ideas,
Yeah.
And now I was, we start to see that like Black is Okay is sort of like a very supercomputer take on it now. And so I didn't think that Gukesh would try to take risks with black, so to speak. I thought he'd be like happy to be solid with his black games and look for chances with white. And Jesse was right that he would look for chances in all 14 games.
But where it definitely took me by surprise was the notion, it's still stunning, that he would deny the threefold repetition in a position where he was clearly worse. What are you doing, buddy? What are you doing, man? I think that I would say that happened twice. And it was just like, it was absolutely stunning when he did that. And ultimately, a match strategy, if you go back to the final game where he's pushing it in a position that, should be drawn, it speaks to that strategy where we're just going to push and push, even if we think we're worse, dude. Even if we think we're worse, totally a different way to play the game.
I mean, in a way, Kostya, would you say that you could justify this strategy of pushing all the time by saying like, hey, if he hadn't kept playing when he was worse, if he hadn't extended every game to the max, Ding would have had something left in the tank in that final game where he wins a drawn endgame?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the strategy totally pays off. For me, I was thinking about Gukesh being like a Magnus 1.2x, because Magnus, of course, was famous for pushing these endgames out really, deep and extracting a lot of energy from his opponents. And he did that to Anand quite a bit as well. And for me, I felt like Gukesh just took it to another level where now he's accepting or he's declining repetitions from a worse position. Like, I don't think Magnus ever did that where he's like down in exchange and he like keeps the game going. Like he was pretty objective and like, practical about it. But Gukesh, I felt like he had this strategy going into the match. Like someone told him, just like keep the game going. Just keep the game going against him. He's not used to playing long games. And I think that was a good advice because Ding in the past year has been taking a lot of quick draws, especially like in his most recent event, the Olympiad. Like he wasn't fighting in a lot of games. I remember like he didn't play against Gukesh. He made a very quick draw against Fabi with White. There was other players. So it made sense to try and play long games against him. So I would say like the result, was definitely surprising. Up until the last second of the match, it was basically going to tiebreak, which we did not think was going to happen. But in terms of like the way Ding kind of played, I ultimately like it wasn't totally surprising some of the things he did in the match. I think like he played well based on people's expectations, but he had these two, I would say, pretty serious blunders. There was like the Queen C8, Queen takes C6 in the game that Gukesh won in game 11, I think. And then it was the final game blunder as well. And I remember earlier this year, Ding blundered a fairly simple mate in 2 against Magnus in a classical game. If you guys remember, it was this like very common Queen takes H7 sacrifice. And so it's like, yeah, those blunders I feel like have been a bit characteristic of him since the last World Championship match. So ultimately, like the level of play wasn't like wholly shocking to me in terms of both players.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess what I would say in terms of expectations is, so it was unclear which Ding was going to show up, right? And certainly a lot, let's say anytime Ding had a defending position where he's on the defense, he played some of the best defensive chess that's ever been seen. It was amazing. It was amazing. But if you had told me that the few times that he got the advantage, that he was going to just let it peter out because he didn't have the confidence to keep it going. If you had told me that Ding was there, that he would make it all the way to the end, I would say, no way. No way, buddy. That's huge. That's huge. If you want to be in a world championship match, you're going to get only a couple chances and you better use them. But so somehow, despite that, the guy was playing such amazing defensive chess that it was like, oh my God, he's going to reach the end of this match with zero confidence in himself and still be there. Stunning.
In some ways, it was reminiscent of the Ding that we saw in the Nepo match, right? Where you saw him sort of, quivering, shaking, hiding in the break room, couldn't stand the tension of being at the board. Like you could see that like something's shaking and going wrong and that like a person's melting at the same time. He was like fighting so hard, right? And this time again, it was like part of him is like breaking. He's shaking. He's playing his moves, he's hesitating. He's like rocking before playing it. You could see that he doesn't have confidence, even when we're thinking like, oh, he's about to kill Gukesh, in that game 11, I think it was, early on when the opening was looking so bad for Gukesh. And he's playing moves that we think are killer, sort of without confidence. But the level of the play was, in fact, quite strong. And he was fighting really, really hard.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So let me ask you guys this. We recently ranked every World Championship match in history, including the modern matches. So how does this match stack up against all the recent matches since 1991?
So in terms of the quality of the play and so forth, I find the match to be pretty similar to the match 2 years ago between Nepo and Ding. Both of these matches are characterized by a big difference from the Carlsen matches, which is that neither player is like clearly playing like they're a huge underdog, right? They're each playing like they could try to win the games. For all Ding's issues with his confidence that we've already mentioned, there's an aspect of the way he plays, which is he was playing critical lines. He was going for it. in a certain sense, in many of the decision making that he did. So you get more decisive results, more complicated positions, and more mistakes than in the matches from the Carlsen era, right? Where for 10, 12 years, people are like, Magnus is too strong. Let me just defend for move one. Let me just try to hang in there. I'm not expecting mistakes. I'm not expecting opportunities, right? And you get much more balanced games with like high accuracy, I guess. And, people sticking within structures and opening theory, repeating the same opening many games in a row. I think what might make this match stand out in history much more than Ding Nepo is the participation of Gukesh, because I think there is a chance that Gukesh becomes, and we'll talk about this more later, but it sort of depends on Gukesh as a historical figure, right?
Okay, yeah.
Like if he becomes a really important figure in the history of chess, he's the youngest world champion ever at this point, and might be forever. Does he defend his title a couple times? Does he create a Gukesh era, or does he create an Indian era, or does he, what's his status in history? That could bring up the status of this match. Yeah, and I think also in a sense this match is showing a little bit the evolution of chess that I was just hinting at before, where people can play with black in a new way. The opening preparation is completely changed. Instead of trying to find an improvement on move 25 of some variation that's been played before, they're trying to find like a weird seventh best move on move 6 that is still zeros, but that people haven't played before. Maybe it's got some tricky something or other to it. And they're able to do that with white and with black. I think Gukesh is the first person who's really brought that new style of chess opening prep and play to a world championship match. And we may have like a following era where that's how people play the opening.
Yeah.
So that could also mark a sort of historical transition. And that's kind of like a computer transition. The computers aren't the ones playing the match, it's the humans, but it's kind of a change that's come with the change in the engines.
One thing I'd say about ranking it with the other modern matches is one thing that's just great for chess is every match now that we get, because of social media, because of the ability to stream it, because of the chess boom, every world championship match becomes more heightened and dramatic due to the amount of attention paid to it. I mean, just contrast it to back in the day when I'm waiting like months for some stupid Chess Life to come through the mail to tell me what happened in the Karpov Kasparov match. And then I would get it all at once. I'd get like 7 games, all of it at once, and some lame report. No, now I'm here. I'm at the sidelines. I'm cheering. I'm participating. So all of that makes it so much more interesting as a spectacle, and I enjoy it so much more, as a fan. But then in terms of like comparing it, I think you got to say, wait a second, this is like very similar, as David said, to Ding Nepo. There's an asterisk on it as to whether or not it's a world championship. I don't have a strong opinion in saying it's a world championship or not, but it's got to be said that when Kramnik and Kasparov throw shade on it, they're doing it with kind of a legitimate point that Carlsen's still playing and he's just not there. And one of the things that David said I really liked is this question of Gukesh maybe as a historical figure, because Gukesh himself acknowledges that he's not the best in the world. And right there, you're like, okay, some honesty, great, but also this can't be a world championship. But at the same time, it's like, well, clearly, because the kid's so young, he can grow into that role and either challenge Carlsen or surpass Carlsen, right? So there's this really interesting tension there that's going to help define even how we start thinking about the world championship going forward. Like I was telling you guys before we started, I really think there's this interesting thing where every world championship is in communication with its predecessors and informs the future, right? So the last 2 world championships, we've had this odd precedent of something people are calling a world championship, but it's still a world championship, And so there's like a level of discomfort that I have with that and others, right? But ultimately, maybe I'm just going to get over it. Maybe I'm going to get over it. I don't know.
All right. Well, let's get into it because this is where it's like there's a lot of controversy because I think people see the world championship in different ways. And I think we got to define our position a little bit more clear as well because Jesse, you're saying it might not be a real world championship because Magnus is still the strongest player out there. But at the same time, I feel like we at the dojo generally we respect the lineage. And in the lineage, sometimes the weaker player becomes world champion, and they're no lesser world champion than anyone else. For me, I thought this match. First of all, I thought the match was incredibly interesting to follow for a couple of reasons, but mainly because it was such a clash of players. You have Gukesh. There's this like young prodigy superstar, possible like one of the great players of all time already, and Ding, who's a great player, but like not at his best. And it's like the story, like, will we see the return of Ding, and like what's going to happen? So it's just this like to me, kind of reminded me of like Alekhine versus Oive, where it's like you have this like wounded Alekhine, you got like Oive, it's like who's going to win? You got no idea. And then like, not that it was like the same players exactly, but just like two very, very different players going at it. So I thought it was a great match overall just to follow. I found it very, very interesting. But now it's like, according to the lineage, everyone's calling Gukesh the 18th world champion, with Ding being the 17th, Carlsen being the 16th, Vichy at number 15, Kramnik 14, Kasparov 13, and then before that is not so controversial. So this lineage, of course, excludes Topalov. So I want to, just voice that. And it excludes the other FIDE world champions when Kasparov split away from FIDE. People are also calling Gukesh the youngest world champion, which excludes Ponomarev specifically from that title. So I guess my question is, the lineage is obviously, I feel like, what we all believe in. But the lineage does not always have the best player as the world champion, right? So doesn't that, in a way, justify Ding and Gukesh as holding the throne?
For example, I would say that in 1966 and 1969, Petrosian and Spassky played two fantastic matches, which I ranked higher than the Carlsen matches, right? Mm-hmm. They played two fantastic matches. The best player in the world at that time, in my opinion, was Bobby Fischer, and he didn't participate. I don't think that they weren't world champion, right? They won the world championship. If I were, twice as old as I am and had been an American chess fan at the time, I might have been really upset that Fischer couldn't be convinced to participate in the candidate cycle, or that Soviets had cheated in a previous candidate cycle, and that had soured him on the candidate cycle. Whatever, you can have any opinion about like stuff around it, right? And I'm sure that at any period in history, I would have probably had gripes about something. That's part of my character, perhaps. But I would still say that, Petrosian was world champion, and then Spassky was world champion, and then Fischer was world champion finally in 1972.
Let me just push back a little bit, David. I really think when you look at Fischer that he elevated his game beginning in the late 60s, and he's not the same player. He's significantly better by 69 than he is in 65.
He is.
So I don't think it's clear at all that Petrosian and Spassky were on a lower level at that
Agreed.
point.
And we shouldn't get too distracted by this point maybe, but by 1969, he must have been the best player. By 1972, there was a 100-point gap between him and the second best player. So he had a lot of room to elevate his game from having already been the best player. It's possible, right? Okay. So anyway, I don't think, and you can think of other moments in time where it's like not clear who's number one and whether they're in the world championship match. I think that you can have the world championship match without the number one player being part of it. I think it's great, preferable if in general or frequently they take part. But to me, it's super clear that Gukesh is world champion. He went through a grueling process to qualify for it with Naka, Fabi, Nepo, right? Who else do you think should be competing for it, right? Everybody who wanted to participate except for Magnus participated, and he came out on top. So to me, it's like very clear he's the world champion.
Okay. Now, I just want to say, for those of us, like I imagine Jacob Agard is screaming at us right now because we excluded these people. And let's just say there's a little element of hypocrisy on our parts here. Okay, let me just say that we describe the hypocrisy on our parts. So we're excluding these FIDE champions in the 90s. In the 90s, Kasparov goes off on his own and then starts conducting, he loses funding for his business, right? And so there's a real janky cycle that happens with all kinds of arbitrary shenanigans going on by Kasparov, and he can't get the funding. The whole reason he left was to get the funding. And then so all of this janky stuff is going on. And why don't we say, though, that those players weren't world champions? Because Kasparov was still playing. And his cycle, yes, it was a cycle, but it's still pretty janky. So what we're saying,
even if he hadn't been playing, I would have still had a difficult time stomaching what FIDE was doing. It was, like 2-game matches with rapid chess tiebreakers.
Okay,
like
yeah.
That
there was
thing
also
was like
that
really,
problem too. Yeah, FIDE's world championship at that time was also ugly looking. But still, if you just want to go by the book, there's a certain hypocrisy on our part here.
Right.
I just want to acknowledge it. I think we're correct in this. There are differences, but I just want to Jacob, I hear you, boss. I hear you, buddy. Okay.
But there's a big difference, of course, because Kasparov continued to play matches and call himself the world champion, whereas Carlsen has clearly relinquished the title, does not call himself the world champion.
He calls himself world number one.
Called himself world number one, which is non-controversial. And he, just recently said like he wouldn't play Gukesh if FIDE offered him some kind of like, instant world championship match or whatever. He's not interested. Or maybe, to be more clear, maybe he was just not interested in the candidates cycle going through that process at all, so for me, it's like, he's given up the title. Whether he's retired from chess completely or not is kind of irrelevant in terms of the cycle. Carlsen, he's out of it. So the chess world has to move on. It's basically the same thing as if he completely retired from chess, or if, tragically like he passed away or something, the chess world would have to move on and just have a new champion. That's how it goes. And we have had champions that like Alekhine passed away and we had to have a new champion. That's how it works. So he's out of it. And I think looking back on now in 10 years, let's say, for example, 10 years from now, we look back on it and then Carlsen never again really fights for the title, never tries to set up a match, just continues to play chess 960, rapid chess, blitz, all this stuff. We'll basically just say like, okay, his era ended in 2021 and after he gave up his title and then that was it. And then we just had these new world champions from then on. I think that's easily how things could end up playing out.
I thought you were going to say from India, but you said from then on.
Then
the 100-year era of Indian champions began.
One of the interesting things too that happened just right after the match that I found fascinating was a lot of media sources started calling him the 18th. So, Kasparov the 13th and the 18th, there's a picture of them and there's the subtitle is the 13th and the 18th. And so what this does in just like one sentence is takes down a complete narrative of FIDE world champions in the 90s. It just instantly in one sentence.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a consensus that we then put out there. And Jacob and people like him are going to be squirming. They're going to be like, I can't take it. My bro Topalov, what about him? That kind of thing. And so it's just an interesting thing that's happened in the fallout of the match. Kind of even like a global consciousness, just instantly just like, he's the 18th, he's that lineage.
I feel like back then, Jesse, there was a more significant minority who would have thought that the FIDE champion was the real champion. And now, like, as that's becoming history,
right?
Exactly. That's like now 25 years ago, we're seeing history converging towards the Kasparov-Kramnik lineage, right? And so you're citing one or two people who might be upset about Ponomarev not being taken into account in this record. But I do think that number of people who believe that is dwindling, right? As like history slowly moves on.
You hear that, Jacob, buddy? You hear that?
That's my feeling. My feeling is it's really like becoming more and more of like a forgotten argument or outlier position.
Okay.
And
I hope so. Yeah.
To me, it's very clear that Ponomarev didn't win a real world championship match against a real previous world champion, and that Gukesh did.
I do think Topalov maybe has more of a gripe than Pono, because Pono, he won one of these like World Cup tournaments. Yeah. And Topalov, he became FIDE world champion by winning like a real world championship tournament, this tournament in San Luis. And there was precedent for that because, for example, Botvinnik became world champion by winning the Alro tournament against the world's greatest players at the time. The only difference there is that after winning this tournament, Topalov then had, the so-called reunification match with Kramnik, right, and then lost that match. And so like he loses that match. It's like, you can't, he lost to Anand as well. So it's like he never won a match to become world champion, right? So I feel like he's very close, but ultimately, I don't know. I can't. Yeah. It's hard to give it to him.
By the way, just so Jacob, I know you're out there. What he's going to say is he's going to say FIDE forced Kramnik to sign on a document that
Topalov
was the world champion, just so that they would get. He wasn't going to get the match unless he said that on paper. So we get it on paper. There's some kind of argument.
All right. And this may just be complete confusion on my part, but like to me, it does feel like Topalov was world champion for 10 seconds or something like that. And I see that decade between Kasparov Carlsen as being the Kramnik Topalov Anand triumvirate. Right, the three regions of chess.
David, you called it like the parity before between the three players, Kramnik, Anand, Topalov. But I feel like, to be fair, Anand won that parity. He won 2 out of 2 matches against both of them. Kramnik came second, then Topalov third, in my opinion.
That's fine. You can think that, and you might totally be right. But frequently Topalov was number 1 on the rating list. So what are Kramnik and Anand doing playing a world championship match if the number 1 rated player is not participating? No, but I mean, I think they were relatively close. When I say parity,
that era for sure.
I mean, they're like exactly 1-1-1, but it's like it's hard to tell who's better than who, right? Because Kramnik beats Topalov in tie breaks. Anand beats Topalov in the last game because Topalov is afraid of the tie breaks. If there weren't rapid tie breaks, if they just kept playing until somebody won in classical, he wouldn't lose that game. So both of those results both of Topalov's lost world championship matches, I can say, are polluted by darn stupid rapid chess in my world championship. Who put it in my teacup? And overall, whoever you think was number 1 on the rating list, they were very, very close for that time. There was never this kind of Kasparovian or Carlsenian or Fischerian gap, right? So that's what I see as like parity. When Carlsen's playing a world championship match, it's like, oh yeah, the ratings say he'll win by 3 points, like every time. He's different.
I wanted to just give a little spiel on another way in which I feel this match is going to change not only the world championships, but maybe elite chess going forward. So Gukesh was asked afterwards, he was like, can you reveal to us who's on your team? And we all had questions like who's helping him behind the scene. We knew that Gajewski was his main trainer. And then the second person he names, he's like, Patty. And I'm like, Patty? Who's Patty, bro? Patty didn't even say no last name or nothing like that. It's like everybody's supposed to know who Patty is. And then, so I do some research on it. And this dude, Patty Upton, he's a sports psychologist. And Gukesh credits him for greatly helping. And I think that like from now on, we're going to get some of these people are going to start infiltrating chess. And first of all, we have to say something obvious, that Patty Upton has been like with 20 different sports, doesn't know anything about chess. But it's interesting with sports, he's dealing with the mind, how it operates in sports. And then obviously, to me, it's obvious that in chess, it's going to be a bigger deal, the mind is, than in other sports. Not that it's not going to be unimportant in other sports, but just in chess, obviously, it's got to be more because that is the actual tool that you're using.
Yeah, I mean, it's even more critical in chess because in other sports, if you're not performing well, visually it can be obvious and statistically it might be obvious because you start missing shots or whatever. In chess, if you're not performing well, it's really not that obvious until it's kind of too late, until you just start losing too many games. It's like, oh, I guess I was in horrible form this tournament. So having this amazing mental shape, also the ability to bounce back from losses, which I think Gukesh is like uniquely fantastic in. That might be another thing that is just going in his favor.
Yeah. So let me just sketch a little bit about this guy's approach. I think it actually can inform some of the dojo stuff as well. So, the dojo has advocated that you analyze your games. We now have this great book, How to Analyze Your Games, right? And we have hundreds of people doing it on a consistent basis. So let me just tell you some of the basics of the Patty Upton philosophy. It's so interesting because it applies to everything. And of course, like me as a chess player, I thought about going over your games as a very chess specific thing. But for him, it's actually like applies to any sport where it goes in this cycle of like, you play whatever sport it is you're doing, then you reflect on it. That would be, in our case, going over your games, right? Then you got a period of analyzing and planning, and then you practice whatever it is you analyzed. And then you play again, and you get this iterative cycle, right? And that iterative cycle for whatever sport you're playing is going to be your maturation process to becoming honed in your craft, right? Yeah. And one of the things I just want to say, first of all, is Gukesh is still very young. And I want to say, if he's got problems, I think he still has a lot of positional growth to do, for example. And this simple awareness of being humble and being like, I'm going to reflect on these French games that I don't understand, and I'm going to work on it and I'm going to figure it out, is so important. And so many players, I think Ding is probably in there, are not doing the reflect and analyzing part. They're cutting that out, and they're practicing and they're playing. They're practicing, they're playing, but they're not doing the reflection part of the circle. And I think that's huge. Yeah. Another thing about Upton I think is really important is that he was into Gukesh's head, and it's like, everybody's saying you're going to win, buddy. Everybody's saying that. But we are not preparing for the Ding that's going to lose. We are preparing for the Ding that Kraai says is possible, the Ding of old. He might come back at any point. And so that was the other thing that they were really on about. They're like, this guy might come back, and that is the person we're preparing for.
Yeah. I think
let me just do one more thing as part of my spiel. So I think one of the things that's really interesting about this is if Ding had this guy, I don't think he loses the match to. I don't think he loses the match because this guy is always talking about like how people are distracted either by some past event, like you're worried about how things went wrong in the future, or in the past, or a future event, like you say, oh, with this move I'm going to be a hero, right? Something like that, or with this move I'm going to screw it up, And what I saw time and again from Ding was this very depressed dude in the press conferences who would consistently underevaluate his position. Consistently. He wasn't ever, even when he had a great position and we were talking, he's talking about it in the press, he was like, I didn't like it, And so there was this really fascinating psychological pressure on him where it prevented him from being in the moment. And instead, he's always distracted, like, oh, this is going to be terrible in the future, or this is going to be terrible because of something I've done in the past. And so he wasn't able to be just sitting there. Like you saw with Gukesh, dude, he had this amazing composure, and he would sit there and he would close his eyes, and he clearly he's just there. He's just there doing his thing. And so I think, dude, like, oh my gosh, we could all, like, I don't know if we all need a sports psychologist, but there's like lessons to be learned. And clearly Ding, like if you think of this match being a 1 or 2% thing, then somebody like this is needed for Ding, dude. Yeah. All right, that's my spiel.
Okay, very interesting points, Jesse.
Yeah.
I will say that the sort of that element at the end of just being there and just doing the thing you're doing, that comes more naturally to kids. And Gukesh is still like partly a kid, right? He's right on that borderline. So there's a degree to which, think back to when you were like 16 or 17 and playing chess, right? You weren't traumatized by your past games. You were just going forward. You were just like happy to be at the board. You didn't know what your limits were going to be. You weren't worrying about responsibilities. There's a lot less to distract you to some extent. You're just sort of going for your thing as a kid. That said, you talked about the preparation element, and I read an interview about this, about the work that Upton did with Gukesh, and they were talking about preparing for every single possible scenario. Like, let's say it's game 7 and you're up 1 game and your position's good. Or let's say it's game 8 and you're up 2 games, but your position's bad and you have this much time, or you had a good position in the opening and now you've got a bad position in the middle. Like, he goes through millions of scenarios of every kind of situation so that you have this kind of psychological preparation that is all encompassing. Right? Normally, when we've all done some degree of preparation, right? You guys psych yourselves up when you go for a tournament. You have some degree of toughness because you made master at some point. Like, I know you guys have all kinds of resources, but you probably can still think to many moments where something happened and you got caught in like, oh man, that, and like, I thought I was going here and now I'm going there. And, I was, just like, the yo-yo of a Swiss system where, like, if you win, you get a stronger opponent. If you lose, you get a lower opponent. And you're like, oh, do I get to play more GMs this tournament, or am I going to get like shuffled down here and not be able to get out? Like, something like that could be a thing that gets in your mind during a Swiss tournament, right? I got to win when I'm paired down. Otherwise, I'll be just down there forever. And so they were like prepared for like everything, and also off the board, not just what are you going to think and how are you going to respond to this moment on the board? It's like, how much exercise are you going to do? What are you going to eat? When are you going to eat it? Like, when are you going to get to the board? Like, who are you going to talk to this day? Like, everything is covered in that preparation. And I agree with you, Jesse. If there's like anything that Ding seems like would be the most helpful for him, it would be exactly this thing.
Right.
Okay, guys, if you're a game, I thought it'd be fun to play expectations versus reality. So I'll name something and then you guys say whether it was higher or lower than you expected.
Okay.
And maybe you could explain why. All right, let's start with Ding's level of play.
Higher than I expected.
Yeah, higher than expected.
Higher, right? Yeah, I think I'm with y'all there.
Like, I had a big variance on my prediction on that.
Right.
Very low confidence, very high variance. But quite a bit higher than what I expected. I thought he played at about the level of the match with Nepo. And from the very first game, like, as he's moving the pieces, I just felt the strength, like, ballooning, just like boom. Oh, you feel the aura of that strength. And I've watched other games of his live this year and I just didn't feel it.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. Definitely better than expected, especially game 12 when he wins to come back in the match. That actually was maybe the biggest surprise for me, because I kind of thought it was done. I think a lot of people thought it was done. It was like 95% are saying like, that's it. Gukesh has won the match. It's over. He should have won it earlier. We're surprised that it took this long. But That's it. Ding collapsed. Queen C8. That's it. He's out of there. And then he like wins this game in game 12. It was a very nice game, I thought. And it's like, oh, holy moly. It makes Gukesh look really bad actually in that game. Like, everyone was trashing Gukesh's play. So definitely, I think a little bit better than expected. Okay, what about Gukesh's?
So easy to get yourself trashed, huh, Kostya, when you play on that stage.
Yeah. Gukesh's level of play.
Lower than expected by me.
Lower.
I think I guess about. I mean, he's playing. I mean, it was only lower because we expected him to do better, and Ding was a defensive genius, dude. He would have been +3 against anybody else. I mean, or not anybody else, but most of the other people. Definitely against all the other number 20s in the world.
There was spotty play to me. If you compare it to his other play in 2024, I think he played less well than over the course of the year. I mean, you have to remember that in 2024, he tied for first in Wei Kanze, won the candidates, and had like the second best performance in history at the
Olympiad.
Along the way, he had a very middling 9 draws in a row at the Sinkfield Cup. Those are like the 4 major classical events that spring to my mind. And I think in this match, like his level of play was a bit lower than in all of those other events.
Okay.
For me, I would say that was about expected, given that it's his first match. He was probably very nervous to play on such a huge stage. And so, yeah, I think Carlsen also played a bit worse than his best in his first match as well. I think many players probably do that. So for me, I feel like Gukesh performed probably about as one could reasonably so definitely good.
Yeah. Maybe my expectations were just wrong. I was like, he's just going to keep playing like Gukesh, like he's been good under pressure in the past. And I didn't think that we'd be talking about like, oh, well, considering the circumstances and his opponent played well and he was nervous and it's the world championship. I didn't think we'd have to say any of that. You know what I mean? Like my prediction obviously was wrong, but it was based on like, he's just going to play like Gukesh, he's just going to play like 28-30 to 28-40 level, something like that. He's just going to come in there and like play Gukesh, or what do we know? Maybe he'll be better than last month, So I just expected like solidly like over 2,800 level play. And I think what we got was more like, high 2,700s from both of them.
All right. Next topic. What about Ding's openings for the match? Better or worse than expected?
About expected.
Yeah, about expected. I didn't have any like super high expectations on his openings. And I kind of expected that a lot of the time Gukesh would be able to set the tone in the openings, not to the extent that it happened, Kostya, but if your opponent is like surprising you again and again, there's only so much of your prep that you even get to see, right? Like I think we probably didn't see a lot of Ding's prep because Gukesh didn't play into it.
And we got to say, one thing, so I would say for all of the recent World Championship matches, I would say openings played the least role of any. These games were simply not decided in the opening. No. That said, I think the really interesting thing that Ding did was to play the French, and somehow maybe it was rapport, understood that Gukesh wouldn't be able to play those positions well. Then Gukesh doesn't really want to play e4 after that first game. I think it's a huge blow. And let's say the obvious. I mean, Ding was a master of e5. That's more his style. And he was able basically to come into the match, be competitive because of the French. So that was an interesting story. Even though, Gukesh is the one who had all these novelties, the fact that Ding survived so well with the French speaks to him actually making the more interesting opening decision, even though it wasn't just it wasn't a bunch of prep. It was just like a decision.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, to me, that was interesting that Ding's prep was seemingly like non-existent. He was like, I started preparing like 3 weeks before the match. Yeah. He was tanking in like all these well-known positions. The game starts, he's black, knight f3, d5, c4, d4, and he's like thinking already like 3 moves in. But yeah, in terms of like the opening choices, he's able to get games with white. He's able to win this critical game 12. And with black, he was kind of like... surviving, getting positions that he could outplay Gukesh in certain situations. He pretty much never got rolled over in the opening, right? It was, I feel like almost every game was a 3 result position coming out of the opening. The advantage in Gukesh's prep was mainly shown on the clock. And in the difficulty. The only game where I think Gukesh really... I think it was only games 7 and 8, one with white, one with black, where Gukesh really got good position, like opening advantages.
And I would say the one clear opening advantage was when Ding played the London and got that beautiful position, and then decided, I don't want to play for a win. Yeah. I'll just let this go,
Yeah. How
Yeah, and
about
possibly the game 12, which we struggled to evaluate correctly as it was coming out of the opening. Maybe he had the advantage because we never really found the equalizer for black.
Yeah, that one, everyone was praising Ding for his opening play, his middle game play. Well, not totally praising Ding. A lot of people had criticism for Gukesh. It was like drifting in that early middle game in game 12. But still with rightful praise for Ding.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the level of media / world interest in the match?
Yeah, I think, well, let me put it this way. I think we all predicted that India would be all in on this match.
Yeah.
What was really interesting to me as a fan was after it ended, like to watch Chess Base India, hosted by Sagar Shah, friend of the dojo, somebody who's been there for the whole growth of Indian chess. And he's hosting the show with this room of people, some other commentators, and the blunder happens and this pandemonium breaks out. And it made me emotional watching it. I was like crying. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Just how moved this crowd of people was. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so like, I think from an intellectual standpoint, we appreciated there was going to be numbers and interest, but like the mania, the mania, I was like, oh, this is fascinating and I'm into it.
Yeah, I just want to say those Chess Base India streams were very fun because they would have these like poppers that they would launch when Gukesh found the right computer move, which is so funny and so opposite to what we do, obviously, but so.
The clip I saw, Kostya, they were pulling on the poppers and they wouldn't pop, and they're like three commentators it won't go, and they never got them off in the clip I watched.
No, they got them off eventually. The chanting Gukesh, and there's 150,000 people. I mean, that was amazing. But that's expected from India. I remember during the Olympiad, Indian fans were just going wild every round as India was taking that tournament away. So yeah, to me, ultimately not surprising at all that Indian fans were so hyped up about Gukesh's performance.
Yeah, I mean, my prediction from our preview show was that whether Gukesh won or lost the match, it would create a surge in chess excitement in India. Just having the event, cheering about it together, watching it would be, motivating and inspiring. And India's chess has already been growing for a couple of years now, and I thought it would continue to surge. And Kostya, what's the word on that? What's our secret dojo info?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it takes us into our next topic, perhaps the impact of Gukesh's win. But we noticed recently during this last month, we were streaming a lot on YouTube, making some videos about the match as well. Normally, our number one audience is the US, but we noticed that India has taken over that spot for our channel. They got something like 29% of our audience. I also saw that female viewership is up to something like 6.8%. So that's way higher than it used to be. So that's cool as well. But I think this is just the beginning of a potential Indian boom of chess. We already had one Indian boom starting with Vishy Anand becoming India's first grandmaster and then world champion. We're still seeing the effects of that right now with Gukesh's win of the world championship. Gukesh's win might inspire an entire new generation of Indian chess players. I'm sure it would. He's already, a superstar, getting regular congratulations from India's prime minister and so on. And I mean, it's just the beginning.
And during the event, Kostya, to your question about, media interest, world interest, I felt like people were pumped and excited. We had great crowds watching our live coverage, and they were really excited. And, we had people watching the whole match at work. I don't know, no work seemed to get done probably. I mean, it was long matches. We had other people getting up at 1 a.m. like me and watching the whole event in the middle of the night with us. So I felt like it was an extremely enthusiastic crowd throughout, good numbers on our own videos, which is what we can measure, compared to other videos and compared to other shows, good numbers. And I think that was probably felt by chess channels and platforms around the world.
Yeah. And, one thing I just want to mention is, here in the States, we all have an awareness of what's called the Fischer boom. And this was a rise in participation after Fischer. But there's a couple of fascinating differences. One, Fischer got very little support to help him win. He was basically all on his own. And when you look at Gukesh and his team, that kid had amazing support from a variety of people. And just to take the case of Bobby Upton, I mean, that guy had worked with the Indian cricket team. And so then you got people behind the scenes asking, how can we help this kid win? And then they hook him up with a guy like Bobby Upton, in addition to whatever other resources they can throw at him. So it wasn't just like him creating this boom, but like there's a wave behind him. And it's going to keep coming, my friends. It's going to keep coming in terms of the strength, and that strength of the Indian teams, the other Indian players. I think his biggest rival right now is Aragaisi, right? So that's going to keep coming. And I just want to stress, when we started ChessDojo, India, in terms of people watching our business, was, I don't know, around 8 or 9 in the list of countries. And now it's clearly number 1, clearly. And so it's like, oh my gosh, you can just see. And I think it's hard for people in countries that aren't in India to appreciate how many people live in India. When I see the number of how many people live in India, I can't actually, I can't, it blows me up. I can't even imagine that many people. So, I mean, it's a kind of boom, which is so much bigger than the Fischer boom.
That I'm very curious to see where that goes. I think Gukesh is going to be a fantastic champion. So that's exciting. What do you guys think will happen to Ding? Now, a bit of context here. Before the match, people were thinking Ding might retire if he loses. He might quit, all this stuff. But then they kind of asked him a couple times, I think, during the match, after the match, what his plans are. And it seems like he's going to keep playing. Maybe he said he'll play less classical. I'm not sure. I noticed in the post-match interviews, he looked dramatically happier as a person. I don't know if you guys shared that impression. To me, it feels like this is going to take a load off of Ding. Like, he said some stuff that he is feeling the weight of the crown. He didn't like that people are calling him the worst world champion ever. Which that was us. We did that. We were part of that. Nothing personal. We love Ding. I root for him so hard. I think he's such a nice person. It's just purely a mathematical evaluation. And I think he, maybe wouldn't even disagree with it, but clearly that's not, no one wants to have that title, obviously.
I would take it.
Oh, sure.
I could be either the worst I am in history with the worst opinions on ChessDojo, or I could be the worst playing world champion of all time. Yeah. I would trade my title. And
to clarify, to be really clear, it doesn't mean he's the worst player. I think Ding versus Capablanca, you destroy Capablanca. I'm just saying in terms of just his performance as world champion. That's what we're talking about. Not
Agreed,
him.
Yeah. You might get dinged by 1 or 2 people in the comment section for just throwing Kappa down like that. But I'm with you.
Ding.
I'm hoping now he can just play chess, and hopefully he keeps playing chess. I really hope he continues to play, because I think he is an incredible player, and he's certainly not past his peak in terms of age or anything like that. He can still hit his peak and all this stuff. So it'd be great to see him play.
What do you see in Ding's future now?
Is it for me?
Yeah.
I think he's toast, dude. I think first of all, we have to talk about the World Championship. Normally, he would get a shot at the tournament, he would be automatically seeded into it. Mm-hmm. And my read of how this next tournament is being set up is that he would have to earn his way.
Yeah, he doesn't get a spot.
And so that's very difficult. He's not going to be the highest rated. He's not going to win the 2024 FIDE circuit. It would be very surprising if he won the 2025 FIDE circuit. And then, winning this weird chess World Cup or the FIDE Grand Swiss, very difficult. Also, the dude's 32. It's a hard age. Like, you're not getting better at that point. And, Fabi is also 32. I feel like this is Fabi's last chance, as an example. And so if Ding were to somehow, he needs to find himself a Bobby Upton, but more importantly, he has to find himself. The dude, you cannot compete at this level without confidence. And so if he doesn't fix that, and I have no reason to think he's going to fix that, then it's just, he's not going to be in the top 20. He reclaimed his spot in the top 20 now. He's now number 17, but oh man. Yeah. So I think it's kind of over, dude. I'm sorry to say, it's just so competitive right now that forget about it.
Well, it might be over for his world championship host, but I think he's not, maybe he's not so interested in that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Been there, tried that, didn't agree with me, right? Like, why go back to that restaurant? No, I think Jesse is like taking the question as, will he become world champion? But I more like Kostya's response. I see good signs for Ding from this match. Like, he played better than he had in a year and a half, and he seemed to like let some of it go at the end. And he didn't break, which was like a very important thing, right? He didn't like fall apart, crack, have any kind of a breakdown. Like, he looked like he was under pressure, but he, didn't even look like he was suffering as badly physically as I've seen him suffering at some other events. So I see some good signs that he might be able to, get things back together and enjoy playing chess. And to me, what people should be thinking about is, do I enjoy playing chess? Am I, having a good time in this chess world? Mm-hmm. It's more important than, am I about to become world champion? So I see good signs for him. And I think, he might be able to continue having a great chess career, actually. I feel the most hope I have in a year and a half here. Will he become world champion? Well, as Jesse says, it's an outside shot. It's very competitive at this point, right? So I can't disagree with Jesse's evaluation that it would be pretty tough for him to get back to the world championship match.
And by the way, I'll just say, I think it's a bummer. I think if you lose the world championship match, you got a spot in the next tournament. I think, just put it out there as a fan, because just to bear in mind, it used to be that if you lost the world championship, you had a right at a rematch. So at the very least, you have the right to be in the candidates tournament.
Right. This does feel very much like an anti-Ding rule, to be fair. It's like the first time they're not giving the loser of the match a spot.
I might be wrong on this, but I feel like the one thing that you get is you get some number of Grand Prix points as like a head start for the next year's Grand Prix because you didn't get to compete in this year's Grand Prix. I think you get something like, 40 points or something like that for 2025.
Yeah, he does get
the world championship match.
I did see he got something like 40 circuit points for the 2025 circuit.
The next circuit. So he gets like a little leg up for next year, but that's still like a grueling thing. And we believe that Fabi is edging out Aragaisi right now, although the rapid and blitz count. So it's not over yet. But, even with a leg up, if he has to compete with somebody like Aragaisi with those young legs, like zipping around the circuit, playing hundreds of tournaments, and not to mention, Abdus Satorov and other young and talented players. I mean, obviously, nobody is a shoo-in to win that circuit. That's a tough road.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys about the youngest ever record? I'm just curious if either of you thinks that anyone in the future will break Gukesh's record. He's now the youngest world champion of all time, 4 years younger than Garry Kasparov, which is, 23% like reduction in the record at one shot is like incredible. You can't like imagine any racing or any competitive sport, the record being shattered by that kind of a margin. Somebody just went out tomorrow and ran the 100-meter dash in 7 seconds, or a 13-year-old went and went and won the 100-meter dash somewhere. Like, it's just inconceivable. Do you think that anyone ever breaks this record?
To me, the record, the biggest thing would be, at what age does he get the number one spot? Right now, he's 60 points behind Carlsen. 60! That's a big deal. So it's like, this is where this asterisk things comes in, you know? Like, yes, it's cool to have done it at 18, but he's not at the top, dude. And he knows it too. So I don't know. And to me, it's like, I think Gukesh is going to grow. I have no doubt that he's going to grow as a player, that he's going to get better. And so for me, the interesting question is, when does he get to number one? I think it's probably going to be, probably around Kasparov's age of 22. That's just my little thing I'm going to throw.
Magnus made number one right around his 19th birthday.
And Magnus is the GOAT, dude. You won't acknowledge it.
Well, no, but all right, Kostya. My actual question, maybe you'll answer. Do you think anyone can win the world championship?
I would bet that his record will not be broken. But the reason for that is because I don't think the system of the lineage of matches is going to last that much longer. Just the way I see things headed in the chess world, I think we're going to have another match between Gukesh and the next challenger. Maybe we'll have another match after that. But I think pretty soon, just the way the chess world is going, I think FIDE is again going to switch to one of these like yearly systems where we have a yearly world champion, or chess.com is going to take over the world championship. The format will change. Magnus will want 960 rapid blitz. And I just feel like the way things are heading, at some point,
it'll all be like Grand Prix and circuits and sort of like more like a tennis ATP tour, like on a yearly cycle.
Exactly. I think they're just going to like retire the system with like Gukesh being the last classical world champion, or maybe Fabi beats Gukesh next time and then Fabi's the last class. I think that's how I kind of feel like things are going to play out. Maybe we'll get a 19th champion, maybe a 20th, but at some point, like, the world is just going to advance too much. People are just going to want to see fast chess, and the system will change so much that we won't consider it the same as these lineage champions. Once someone starts winning like a rapid world championship and it's like a mix of format, we'll just consider it a completely different era of chess. And that's why I think Gukesh will be like the youngest in the lineage, because I don't know how long the lineage is going to last.
Be the youngest and, perhaps like the last of them. The world does change a lot. That is true.
That's my fear. Yeah.
I always want to push back on this prediction. I think the amount of interest in this world championship match shows that the world wants a match. They want this tension. And have they ever been as interested in any other chess event? Have they been interested in Magnus's little blitz tournaments? No, they don't care.
Yeah.
They want this match, dude. And we want this match. And there's nothing comparable to the interest that this match generates to some other format. So that's why it's going to stay, dude.
It's a good point. I mean, and I think it's a good thing for people to think about that are running tournaments, because there's all these like new tournaments and exciting stuff. But ultimately, the two biggest events of the year, at least from our point of view, in terms of interest, viewership, it was the candidates and it was the match. And like, it wasn't even close in terms of the interest.
Yeah. It's true. With all the innovations and the new people like moving the chess world forward, these are people who look at numbers, and they know that the viewership numbers on the world championship are just head and shoulders above. It's not like, oh, if we, got one more player from like a different country, then like our Blitz tour would have more viewership. Maybe it would nudge it out. Yeah. It's just incomparable. The world championship is really still commanding a degree of attention and interest that's really high. So
it's stakes. It's all about stakes. The only non-FIDE event I can think of that had even close to this amount of interest was when Carlsen met Niemann in the SEC finals, right? Because there was so much controversy there. They're playing in person for the first time in a while. Like, I remember there was an insane amount of interest for that match. But that also had incredible stakes, this huge drama, huge backstory. That's very rare. It doesn't happen often for chess tournaments.
That said, Kostya, like, did you watch that match?
I didn't watch that match.
I watched it live.
You watched it live? Okay.
With pizza and popcorn. No, for me, like, that was my pay-per-view, that.
Okay. Yeah, no, fair enough. I'm just curious because, like, there was a lot of buzz going into it. But you know how we get a certain like finger on a certain pulse of the chess world with people coming into our chat and asking us questions, right? Like people came into chat and they're like, what do you think of like Gukesh's win? Or what do you think of Ding's blunder? Or did you see what Kramnik said on Twitter? Like, what do you think, right? So like we've got a certain sense what people are really like pumped up about. And I didn't hear anybody mention that match after it was done, really. Like there was an article on chess.com about it, of course, because it's their event, but nobody has ever come into our chat and asked me about it.
It did. I would say it did die off. Yeah, like leading up to it is very hype, but it did die off rather quickly.
I had forgotten about it.
There we go. Okay. Well, I think that's it. Unless
that was great, man. That was good.
Cool.
Great match. Excited to see what comes next. The last thing I would say, like if we're talking about this match, we have to say one last thing about it.
Yeah.
Which is these two guys are wonderful people. They played a great match, but can we just say they're wonderful people? Mm-hmm. It took a long time for the result to sink in to me. Partly the sleep deprivation, the disorientation. People were asking me questions. I was sparring with the dude. Like a blunder came in. We'd already basically like marked the result in our mental checklist, and we were already thinking about the rapid match the next day. It took me like, and I had to sleep for 5 hours, but it was only like 11, 12 hours later that it sunk into me that Gukesh had won the match. And when it sunk in was me reading his answers to some interview questions. And he was so kind and mature and thoughtful. And he was saying some like really sweet things about his opponent. And when I read these comments from this 18-year-old, that's when I like cried finally. And I was like, he did it. He's actually like, I've dreamed about this, you know, for years, and he's finally world champion. At first, like the taste wasn't there. I didn't know what would happen. You know, a blunder. I'm not into blunders. I didn't want rapid. Then I read this. I'm like, this guy is just like incredible. What a beautiful, wonderful young man he is. And what a wonderful, beautiful person Ding is, you know? And I think we talk so much X's and O's and stuff. And then people come in and they say like, you hate Ding because like you thought Gukesh was going to win the match, or you hate Magnus because you rated his match with Caruana lower than Hall versus Botvinnik or something. Like, I don't hate any of these people. And let's just take a moment away from the X's and O's to say these guys are wonderful. They like put everything on the line. They fought really hard. Would have been great if it were twice as long, but within the format FIDE gave them, they gave it to us. And always friendly, polite, gentlemanly with everyone around them. Respect for the game, respect for the lineage, respect for the viewers. Bravo. Thank you to them.
Yeah, David. Bring back Korchnoi, buddy. Bring back Korchnoi.
No, it was so nice. And then people were like, yeah, you guys are trashing Ding for calling out his blunders. It's because of the respect we have for Ding that we're so surprised by the blunder. Oh man. No, that was well said, David.
Anyway,
well said.
I think they could usher in terms of the impact, an era of good sportsmanship in chess, right? Sometimes new champions bring in openings. Maybe they could usher in like a period where we're all really like friendly and kind and respectful and like realize our opponents are people too and all that.
Respect for the game. We'll see. All right, folks. Thanks for listening. If you haven't checked out the Patreon already, please do so. If you'd like to support the podcast, we put up a poll for future topics, so you can vote on what we discuss next. And you can also support the show and keep it going. So thanks for listening.